The cabin stood alone beneath a sky the color of ash. Snow drifted past the windows in slow spirals, glowing pale in the lantern light outside. I remember the silence most of all. Not normal silence. The kind that settles deep into the woods after midnight, where even the wind sounds afraid to move. I had rented the cabin to escape the noise of the city. No phone signal. No neighbors. Just endless pine trees and a frozen lake somewhere beyond the fog. The owner warned me not to wander after dark. He smiled when he said it, but his eyes never did. The first night felt peaceful. The fire crackled softly. Old floorboards groaned beneath my socks. Somewhere upstairs, pipes hummed inside the walls like distant voices. I sat beside the window with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, watching snow gather on the porch railing. That's when I noticed the footprints. Large. Too large. They appeared from the trees without warning, pressed deep into the snow one after another. Not wolf tracks. Not human either. Something in between. I remember leaning closer to the glass, trying to understand what I was seeing. And then the forest went completely still. No wind. No rustling branches. No sound at all. That's when I saw it standing between the trees, watching the cabin like it had been waiting for me to arrive. Winter arrived before I ever felt ready for it. The road to the cabin disappeared behind me, swallowed by white fog and drifting snow. I had come here after the divorce, after everything in my life stopped feeling like mine. Silence was supposed to help. Distance. Cold air. Empty trees. The cabin sat deep in the forest, leaning slightly under heavy snow, its windows dull like tired eyes. For the first hour, I thought it might actually work. The quiet pressed against my skin, soft and heavy, like the world had finally stopped asking anything from me. Then I stepped outside the next morning. That was when I saw them. Footprints circling the cabin. Not random. Not lost. They were deliberate, carving a slow loop around the walls, pressed deep into fresh snow, as if something had taken its time learning the shape of place. I told myself it was wind shaping old tracks, or some animal wandering in confusion. But the pattern didn't stay the same. Each morning, the prints were closer to the porch, closer than before, closer than I wanted to believe. The circle around the cabin tightened, like something was rehearsing my boundaries in the snow. At night, the forest stayed perfectly still. No wind, no birds, just that heavy, frozen silence pressing against the walls. And then came the scratching. Not loud, not frantic, just slow, deliberate marks dragged across the roof, like something above me was testing the surface, learning where it could stand without being noticed. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the cabin breathe around me. One night, I searched the old drawer beneath the counter. Dust rose into the air, thick and dry, stinging my throat. Inside, I found a folder of forgotten papers from a property owner. There was a note about the last guest, 3 years ago, gone during a snowstorm that never fully cleared. No tracks leaving, only the same circling marks around the cabin. My hands went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. I looked out the window and saw the forest standing still, too still, like it was holding its breath with me. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept listening for the roof, for the scratching. The days after that began to blur together. White mornings, gray afternoons, endless nights that pressed so tightly against the glass I could almost feel them inside the room. I stopped remembering the exact time I arrived. Time itself felt buried under snow. Sometimes I would stand at the window for hours, watching the circle around the cabin like it was a ritual being performed just for me. I began noticing small changes in the tracks I had ignored before. The spacing became more confident, more certain, as if whatever made them no longer needed to hesitate. One night, I thought I saw the prints overlap with my own footprints near the porch. That detail stayed with me longer than sleep ever could. I remember pressing my hand against the cold glass, feeling it sting my skin, watching nothing move outside while knowing something was there anyway. The roof scratching returned in deeper patterns after that. Not just testing anymore, more like searching, mapping, learning. I started avoiding the corners of the cabin, as if they belonged to something else. Even the walls felt thinner at night, like they were slowly forgetting how to keep things out. I would sit in silence until my ears rang, listening for anything that confirmed I was still alone. But the silence never fully stayed silent anymore. It always felt occupied, like breathing just out of reach. And every morning I checked the circle again, always a little closer, always unchanged in purpose. There was one moment I still cannot explain. I woke before dawn to complete silence. No wind against the glass. No movement in the trees. Even the roof had stopped speaking. I thought, for a brief second, that it had finally left. Then I saw the new tracks. They were not circling anymore. They were facing the door, perfectly aligned, waiting in a straight line toward the porch, as if the waiting itself had changed shape. I did not move, did not breathe. The cabin felt smaller than it had ever been. Outside, the forest stayed frozen under pale light, holding its silence like a secret too old to speak. And I understood then that whatever had been circling was no longer learning the cabin. It was learning me, and it was already close enough to stay. The nights began to change without warning, not in the way storms arrive, not loud, not sudden, but in the smallest details, like the cabin forgetting how to stay quiet. It started at exactly 3:11 a.m. I know because I stopped sleeping properly after the first few nights. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, counting the cracks of wood until the numbers stopped making sense. Then a knock, soft, careful, like someone touching the door, just confirm it still exists. I told myself it was ice shifting, with contracting in the cold, the kind of sound old cabins make when they settle into winter. But it came again, 3:11 a.m., same place, same rhythm, not random anymore. I began sitting up in bed, waiting for it, the silence before it felt heavier each night, like the air was holding its breath too. Outside, the forest never moved, not even the branches, just fog pressed between the trees like frozen smoke. And then the knock returned, always 3 soft taps, always patient. One night, I finally looked out the window. Snow covered everything in pale light. The porch lamp flickered weakly, buzzing like it was tired of working. And beneath the window, footprints, fresh, deep, standing right below the glass, as if something had been there just moments before deciding not to leave. I froze there, watching. Nothing moved outside, but the prints felt recent, warm in a way snow should not be. That was when the knocking changed. It stopped being wood. It became breathing, slow, close, right outside the bedroom door. I could hear it pressing against the wood, not knocking now, just waiting, exhaling softly, like it was learning the shape of my fear through the walls. I didn't move. The house felt smaller with every second, like the walls were leaning inward just to listen better. Then came the storm. Wind slammed into the cabin, so hard the windows trembled. Snow scraped against the glass like fingernails searching for cracks. And through it all, the breathing stayed, patient, unbroken. At some point, I stopped knowing if I was awake or just listening too deeply into silence. The door creaked slightly, not opening, not closing, just acknowledging that something on the other side had decided to stay. And then a shadow, tall, still, standing outside the window during a flash of lightning. Its shape wasn't clear, only its presence. And when the lightning struck again, 2 pale yellow reflections stared back, not blinking, not shifting, just watching. The breathing outside the door stopped, but the silence that replaced it felt even worse, like it had finally gotten close enough to wait inside the quiet with me. The forest changed after that night, not visibly, not in any way I could explain to myself. But walking through it felt wrong, like the paths no longer remembered how I moved through them. I don't know why I left the cabin. Maybe I thought distance would reset whatever had started circling me. The snow was deeper now, heavier, each step sinking too far into silence. That's when I found the ranger station. It was half buried between dead pines, like the forest had tried to forget existed. The windows were cracked. The door hung slightly open. Inside, the air was colder than outside. Broken radios lined the shelves, their wires torn out like something had ripped the building apart from the inside. Claw marks carved deep into walls. too high to belong to anything I recognized. I stood there for a long time without moving. The silence inside the station didn't feel empty. It felt finished. On a table near the center, I found cassette tapes, old emergency recordings. Most were warped with static, but one still played when I pressed it into the player. A voice came through, breathing, shaking. It walks during storms, not on four legs. Don't look at it when the snow turns sideways. The tape cracked into static, then screaming, distant, layered, like multiple people trying to speak at once before being pulled away. I stopped it. My hands were shaking. Behind the station, I found something half buried in snow. A deer, frozen, not torn apart, not eaten, just emptied, no blood, no movement, as if life had been removed instead of taken. The forest around it stayed perfectly still. That's when I noticed something worse. My own tracks, leading up to the station, but not leaving it. I turned back toward the path I came from. There were no footprints behind me anymore, just smooth, untouched snow stretching endlessly in every direction. The forest had erased my return, and somewhere deep between the trees, something had started following the shape I used to be. The lake appeared without warning. One moment there were trees. The next, open ice stretching like black glass under a pale sky. It shouldn't have been there, but it was. Frozen completely still, reflecting nothing properly, not even the stars. I stood at its edge, unsure why I didn't turn back. That's when I saw them. Eyes, far across the ice. Not bright, not glowing at first. Just present, watching from within the fog, like they had been there longer than the lake itself. I told myself it was reflection, ice tricks, distance, but they stayed. Night after night, always the same position, always watching. Sometimes I would hear something across the lake. Not quite a howl, not quite human either. More like someone trying to remember how sound works. Then one evening, the eyes moved closer. Not quickly, not suddenly, just nearer than before, as if whatever owned them had learned the shape of distance. Cracks began forming in the ice. Thin lines at first, then spreading slowly outward like veins waking under glass. I stepped back instinctively. The lake didn't respond, but something under it did. Footsteps, not above the ice. Inside it, the next night, I stood farther from the shore. The eyes were closer again. Too close now, and when lightning flashed through the clouds, I saw something behind them. A shape, tall, still, waiting under fog that did not belong to weather anymore. The ice cracked again, louder this time, and for the first time, I realized the lake wasn't frozen. It was holding something in. The snowfall changed after the lake. It didn't fall like before. It didn't drift or settle gently. It came down in thick, swallowing sheets, as if the sky had started forgetting where the ground was. I walked for hours without direction. Trees blurred into pale shapes. Time stopped feeling measurable. Then I saw it, a cabin, deeper in the forest than anything should have been, half hidden behind heavy snow and bending pine branches. Smoke rose from the chimney, slow, steady, like someone had just lit a fire inside. I stopped walking. My breath came out in uneven bursts, hanging in the air before disappearing too quickly. There were no tracks, none leading to it, none leaving it, just untouched snow all around, smooth as if nothing had ever stepped there before. But the smoke kept rising. That was the first wrong thing. I should have turned back. Instead, I stepped closer. The porch boards didn't creak under my weight. They barely reacted at all, like they had been waiting too long to notice movement. The door was already slightly open, not wide, just enough to suggest invitation. Inside, the air was warmer than outside. Too warm. It felt wrong against my frozen skin, like stepping into a memory that didn't belong to me. A fire burned in the hearth. Low, controlled. No sound except the soft pull of burning wood. The room was arranged. Not messy, not abandoned. Arranged like someone had left only for a moment and expected to return. On the table sat a plate. Dinner, still warm, steam barely visible, curling upward in thin threads that dissolved into the ceiling shadows. I didn't understand that part. Nothing should have been warm here. Not in this forest. Not in this silence. My eyes drifted across the room slowly. Then I saw the photograph. A family picture. Framed, slightly tilted on the mantel. The edges were yellowed, like it had been handled too many times or left in the wrong kind of light for too long. 1987 was written faintly on the back. I didn't touch it, but I felt something tighten in my chest anyway. There were faces in it, smiling. Still, too normal for a place like this. Too alive for a cabin that didn't leave tracks. That's when I noticed the mirrors. Every single one was covered. Cloth draped across them like someone had made a deliberate choice not to look back at anything reflected inside the room. Some of the fabric was old. Some was newer. All of it hung still, even when the fire shifted. I stood there longer than I meant to, listening. The cabin had its own silence. Not empty silence. Occupied silence. Like something was already aware I had entered. I moved deeper inside. My boots barely made contact with the floorboards. Every step felt like I was borrowing weight from a place that didn't want me to have it. The kitchen counters were clean. No dust. No decay. Just a faint smell with smoke and something faintly metallic underneath it. Then, a sound outside. Footsteps. Slow. Circling the cabin. I froze. The fire continued burning without change. No reaction. No urgency. Only me. The footsteps continued. Not hurried. Not searching. Measuring. I moved closer to the window. Snow pressed against the glass from outside, blurring everything beyond it into a pale, shifting wall. But I could still hear it. Walking. Around and around. Always staying just out of sight. Then the chimney shifted. A deep, heavy vibration passed through the structure. Dust fell from the ceiling beams in soft bursts. The fire flickered once, then steadied again. The footsteps outside stopped. Silence returned for a moment too complete to trust. I exhaled without meaning to. That was when the chimney shook again. Harder this time. Something struck it from above. The whole cabin trembled under the impact. The framed photograph rattled slightly on the mantel. I didn't look away from the window. The cloth on the mirrors behind me shifted faintly. Not from wind. From something moving inside the room with me. The footsteps returned. Closer now. Not circling. Approaching. The porch creaked under pressure that wasn't mine. I could feel the cabin listening in all directions at once. Then the chimney groaned. A long, strange sound like something pressing its weight against stone from the other side. The fire dimmed for a second. Just a second. Enough to notice. In that brief darkness, I thought I heard breathing above the ceiling. Not wind. Not draft. Something slower. More deliberate. I stepped back without realizing it. My heel touched the table leg. The plate shifted slightly. Still warm. Still untouched. The photograph on the mantel tilted further. And for a moment, just a fraction of time I wish I could forget, I thought one of the faces in it was no longer smiling. Outside, the footsteps stopped directly in front of the door. No hesitation. No delay. The chimney shook violently. Something heavy slid across the roof with a sound like dragged weight and patient intent. I stood completely still. The cabin no longer felt like shelter. It felt like a place that had already been visited, and I was only arriving late to whatever had decided to stay. The cabin felt different after the other cabin. Heavier, like something had followed me back without needing permission. The air inside stayed cold even when the fire burned low. Not freezing, just reluctant to warm. That morning, the weather radio crackled alive. I hadn't touched it in days. No batteries. No power. It should have been dead. But static filled the room anyway. Long, steady. Almost rhythmic. I stared at it, unsure if I should move. Then the static shifted. Not into words at first. Into breathing. Soft. Close. Like someone standing on the other side of the speaker, trying to remember how to exist in sound. A voice followed. Broken. Layered. Distorted like it was coming from under ice. Storm system expanding. Do not follow the signal. It learns faster in whiteouts. The words cut in and out, then stopped. Static returned. But now it felt different. Intentional. like it was waiting for me to listen correctly. Then came coordinates, not spoken clearly, just fragments between bursts of noise, numbers repeating in uneven rhythm, pulling themselves into meaning whether I wanted them to or not. I wrote them down without thinking. My hand didn't feel like mine. Outside, the wind picked up slightly. Not loud, just present, as if the forest had heard something it didn't like. I followed the signal later that afternoon. The snow was deeper than before. Every step sank too far, like the ground beneath had loosened its memory of weight. The coordinates led me into a broken stretch of forest. And there, bones, massive ones, half buried in snowdrifts too old to be fresh. Not deer, not bear, something larger, something wrong in shape, too long in places where structure should not allow it. The wind moved through them, creating a low, hollow hum, like the forest was trying not to speak directly. I stood there longer than I meant to. Then I heard it. Behind me, a shift in snow. Not footsteps. Something adjusting its position. I turned slowly. Nothing was there, but the trees felt closer than before, like they had leaned in slightly while I wasn't looking. By the time I started walking back, the sky had already begun to dim. The signal in my pocket stopped working completely, and the silence behind me started following at the same pace I moved. I found the snowmobile by accident, or maybe it wasn't an accident at all. The forest didn't feel like it allowed accidents anymore. It sat on a frozen trail, between trees bent under heavy snow. Engine still warm, not running, just recently used. Steam rose faintly from the metal, disappearing too quickly into cold air. I touched the seat. It was still slightly soft from pressure, like someone had just stood up from it. No tracks led to it. No tracks led away. Only the machine itself, waiting in silence as if it had been placed there and forgotten mid-thought. I stepped closer. Claw marks covered nearby trees. Deep, high, way too high. Not random scratches. Intentional lines carved upward, as if something had tested how far it could bend before breaking. The forest around them was quiet in a different way now. Not empty. Held. The sun dropped faster than it should have, light fading into a gray haze that made everything feel distant, even things close enough to touch. I considered leaving the trail, but the silence behind me shifted first. So I stayed on it. That was my mistake. As I walked, I began noticing something in the snow beside my own footprints. Another set, matching pace, not crossing mine, not disturbing them, just existing alongside them, like a second version of me that didn't need to be seen to follow. I stopped once. The second track stopped too. I started again. So did they. The realization didn't come all at once. It settled slowly, like cold spreading through fabric. Night fell before I noticed how far I had gone. The trees had become taller, thinner, more spaced out, and the trail no longer felt like a path. It felt like direction. Ahead, somewhere between fading light and deeper fog, something screamed. Once, short, cut off too quickly. Then silence. No echo, no continuation. Just absence where sound should have lingered. I didn't run. I couldn't tell if running mattered anymore, because the footsteps beside mine never changed speed, never changed distance. They simply stayed. It started as scratching. Again, but this time it was lower, closer to the ground, beneath the cabin instead of above it. Every evening after sunset, the sound returned, slow, dragging, like something testing the underside of the world for weakness. I tried ignoring it. That lasted 2 nights. On the third, it changed rhythm. Not random anymore. Patterns. Almost like fingers learning how it responded to pressure. I finally crawled out during a snowstorm. The air outside burned against my skin, sharp and wet with freezing wind. The porch boards creaked above me as I lowered myself down. Everything under the cabin was darker than expected. Not just absence of light. Something thicker. Like the snow didn't belong here either. I moved the flashlight slowly. Dust. Frozen dirt. Broken with supports. Then, claw marks. Fresh. Not old damage. Recent enough to still feel wrong in timing. They led deeper beneath the structure. I followed them. The tunnel widened slightly. Enough to crawl but never enough to feel safe. The air grew warmer the deeper I went. That was the worst part. Warmth where nothing should survive. Then I saw it. Animal remains. Shredded, piled, not eaten, arranged, like discarded attempts. And beyond them, a tunnel continuing further down. Too smooth for natural collapse. Too deliberate for accident. I stopped moving. The flashlight shook slightly in my hand. From deeper inside the darkness came an exhale. Soft, controlled, like something noticing I had finally arrived where it had been waiting. I backed out quickly. Too quickly. What above me creaked in response. Not collapsing. Acknowledging. When I finally pulled myself back into the storm, I didn't look under the porch again. But I could still feel it beneath me afterward. Not moving. Just aware. They arrived during a storm. So heavy the world outside disappeared completely. Two figures. Barely visible through falling snow. I opened the door before I understood why. The wind pushed them forward immediately, like the forest was helping them arrive. They were travelers. Lost. Shaking. Their voices sounded tired in a way that didn't come from distance alone. I let them inside. The cabin felt smaller with a minute. Not physically, atmospherically. Like space itself was adjusting to accommodate new uncertainty. They sat near the fire without speaking for a long time. Only the wind talked outside. Then one of them finally spoke. Quietly, carefully. "There are things in storms here," he said. "Things that don't belong to weather." The other didn't look at the windows. Not once. That detail stayed with me. They explained it slowly. A creature that mimics voices. Not perfectly. Almost perfectly. Close enough to make hesitation feel like mistake. It waits outside storms. It learns patterns of speech. It uses familiarity as bait. I listened without interrupting, because I had already heard too many things in this forest that sounded familiar. Night came quickly. The fire dimmed slightly. Outside, snow thickened against the glass. Then, a knock. Not at 3:11 this time. Earlier. More deliberate. One of the travelers froze instantly. The other whispered, barely audible. No. The knock came again. Then my voice. From outside. Perfectly shaped. Calling my name. Exactly as I would say it. The room went still. Even the fire seemed to hesitate. The traveler who had spoken earlier slowly shook his head. "Don't answer it," he said. But the voice outside kept speaking. Closer now. More confident. Like it was testing which version of me would respond first. I didn't move. None of us did. Until morning, when I opened the door again. Only 3 sets of footprints were outside. 2 leading in. 1 leaving. After they left, the silence changed again. It became aware. Not quieter. More focused. I started noticing movement at the edge of the forest each evening. At first, I blamed fatigue. Eyes adjusting to snow glare. Mind filling gaps. But the shapes returned. Tall, thin, standing between trees that should not have allowed anything that size to remain hidden. Always just beyond fog. Never fully visible. Only presence. I began watching them back. Through binoculars one night. That was my mistake. They weren't wolves. Not even close. Wrong proportions. Too elongated. Too still when not moving. Like something designed without understanding how bodies should balance. They never faced the cabin directly, but I knew they were aware of it. One evening, they stepped closer. Not fast, not aggressive, just closer, as if distance no longer mattered in the same way it used to. The cabin lights flickered that night. Once, then again, then died completely. Darkness settled inside immediately. Heavy, pressing. Outside, breathing began gathering. Not one source. Multiple, layered, different rhythms overlapping until the forest felt full in a way it never had before. I stood still near the window, listening, not moving. The shapes between trees stopped just beyond the edge of visibility, waiting. And in that moment, I understood something I didn't want to understand. They weren't approaching. They were arriving, and I had already been inside their attention long enough for it to feel permanent. The floorboard shifted before I even found it. Not breaking, not cracking, just giving away a secret they had been holding too long. I pulled the plank up slowly. Dust rose in soft, dry clouds. It stung my throat. It tasted like old wood and forgotten time. Beneath it, a journal, wrapped in faded cloth. The leather cover felt cold in a way that didn't match the room. I opened it. The first pages were neat. Controlled handwriting. A hunter's notes. Tracking patterns. Weather shifts. Animal routes. Normal at first. Then the tone changed. The words became uneven. White storms are not empty. Something walks upright when visibility drops. It does not hunt like animals do. I paused there. The fire in the cabin flickered slightly, though no wind touched it. I kept reading. The hunter described a pale wolf-like creature. Too tall, too quiet, moving through snowstorms like the weather belonged to it. It didn't chase prey. It selected loneliness. That line stayed in my mind longer than the page. Inside the journal were photographs. Faded, distorted images. Cabins in snow. Shapes standing near windows. Always just outside, clear sight. Never fully visible. Always almost understood. In one photo, I thought I saw a figure standing exactly where I had once stood. But the angle felt wrong. Like the camera wasn't taken by a person. The final pages were worse. The handwriting deteriorated into sharp scratches. Sentences breaking mid-thought. It learned my path. It waits when I stop writing. The last line ended abruptly. A deep tear ran across the paper. Not accidental. Intentional. As if something had interrupted the sentence itself. I closed the journal slowly. And in the silence afterward, I realized something uncomfortable. The cabin felt like it was reading it with me. It began after midnight. A heavy step. Then another. Measured. Not wandering. Pacing. Across the roof above me. I lay still in bed, staring at the ceiling as snow drifted down through tiny cracks I didn't remember noticing before. Each step above sent small vibrations through the wood, dust falling in faint, slow bursts. I didn't move. The steps continued, slow, patient, like something circling an idea rather than a place. Then, scratching, closer now, not just walking anymore, claws dragging across frozen wood, testing it, listening to how it responded. I pulled the blanket tighter, without realizing it. The cabin felt smaller again, like the roof had lowered itself slightly to listen better. Then came the chimney sound. Something sniffing, soft, controlled, right at the opening above the fire. I held my breath. Every part of the cabin felt awake in a way it shouldn't have been. Then a low growl passed through the walls. Not loud, not aggressive, just present enough to change the shape of silence. And then, stillness, absolute. I stayed frozen for what felt like hours, listening to nothing that felt too complete to trust. Morning came slowly, light bleeding through snow-heavy windows. I stepped outside carefully. The roof was covered in thick white layers, perfectly smooth in most places. But near the center, two massive handprints, pressed deep into the snow. Too large to explain, too intentional to ignore. I stood there longer than I should have. The forest didn't move, but it felt like it had already seen what had happened above me. The tower appeared through fog like something unfinished. Tall, thin, metal structure disappearing into white sky. I don't remember deciding to go there, but I remember walking. The climb was worse than I expected. Every step echoed too loudly inside the hollow frame. Wind slipped through gaps in the metal, carrying cold that felt sharper than snow. Halfway up, I found signs of recent presence. Fresh food cans, a half-drunk bottle of water, muddy footprints leading upward. Someone had been here, recently. At the top, the radio room was still functional in a way that didn't make sense. A generator hummed faintly, though nothing below suggested power. Inside, a rifle leaned against the wall, loaded, waiting. A notebook sat open on the desk. One sentence repeated across multiple pages. Do not look into the woods during snowfall. The ink grew darker with each repetition, like panic had been written over time instead of ink. I closed it slowly. Then the wind outside shifted. Not naturally, not weather-like. Something changed in its direction. As night approached, the fog thickened. Visibility dropped until the world below became a moving white void. That's when I heard it, climbing from beneath the tower. Slow, metal vibrating with each upward movement. Not hurried, not struggling, just ascending, like it already knew exactly where I would be waiting when it arrived. The lake returned to my thoughts before I even saw it again, as if the forest was reminding me it hadn't moved away. The ice stretched wide under moonlight, black and reflective, too still. Then the whispers began, across the surface. Carried by wind, that didn't feel like wind anymore. At first, I thought it was memory playing tricks. Then I recognized the voice. Someone I knew, someone who shouldn't exist anymore. A childhood friend, calling my name from somewhere beyond fog. Soft, familiar, wrong. I stepped closer, without meaning to. The ice creaked, faintly beneath distant pressure. The voice grew clearer at night, always when the cabin lights dimmed, always when silence deepened. I tried not to respond, but the name sounded too real, too precise. One evening, I saw a footprint appear on the ice. Not mine, leading outward, toward the fog. I shouldn't have followed them, but I did. The cracks beneath the ice widened as I walked, thin lines spreading outward like something beneath was shifting position. Then I saw it, a figure, far across the lake, standing motionless, not moving, not reacting, just waiting in the fog. And when lightning briefly lit the sky, I understood the voice had never been coming from memory. It had been practicing how to sound like one. The trapper camp was deeper than anything I had reached before, hidden between slopes of frozen stone and trees bent under heavy snow. At first, I thought it was abandoned. Then I saw the fire, still burning, weak, but alive. Coffee steamed beside it, fresh. No one was there, but nothing looked old enough to explain that absence. Animal traps lay scattered nearby, twisted, broken in ways that didn't match force or impact, as if something had tested their shape rather than escaped them. Trees around the camp carried symbols carved into bark, deep lines, repetitive patterns, not random markings, warnings, or language I didn't understand. The air felt heavier here, less like weather, more like pressure. As sunset approached, the forest changed again, not visibly, audibly. Distant howls began rising from every direction, not one source. Many, surrounding the camp slowly, closing distance without moving closer. I stood near the fire, unsure whether to stay or leave. The flames flickered lower, not dying, listening, and in that tightening circle of sound and snow, I realized something that settled cold and permanent in my chest. Whatever had been following me was no longer alone. The storm didn't arrive. It was already there. I only noticed when time stopped behaving normally inside it. Days blurred together, without edges. Morning never felt like morning. Night never fully became night. Just white noise outside the windows. Constant, pressing, alive. The cabin shook sometimes, but not from wind. From something heavier moving through the storm itself. I stopped counting hours. At midnight, if it even was midnight, the noise changed. Louder, closer, like the storm had learned how to stand near the glass. Shadows passed outside the windows, large shapes moving in impossible weather, not affected by wind, not slowed by snow. I would watch them without blinking, because blinking felt like permission. Then came the footsteps inside the cabin, slow, measured, not matching mine. I would freeze in place, listening to the move through rooms I wasn't in, from hallway to kitchen to just outside my door. Each night, the snow rose higher, blocking exits one by one, not quickly, patiently, like the forest outside was sealing the cabin shut on purpose. By the time I tried to leave, the door barely opened, white pressed against it from the other side, soft, dense, absolute. The storm didn't want me outside. It wanted me contained. The teeth appeared in a line, neatly placed, outside the porch. At first, I thought it was animal remains scattered by wind, but they weren't scattered. They were arranged, deliberate spacing, equal distance, careful placement, like something was counting down. Each morning more appeared, closer to the door, closer to where I slept. I stopped going outside at dawn, but I still checked, because I could not know. One evening, a hunter passed near the cabin. I only saw him for a moment between trees. He didn't stay long, but he looked at the teeth, and then at me. His voice was low when he spoke. It leaves gifts before it takes someone. I asked what it meant. He didn't answer directly, just shook his head and walked away faster than before. That night, something tapped at the bedroom window, soft, repeating, patient enough to last until sunrise. I didn't move, didn't breathe properly. When morning came, the tapping stopped, but one final tooth appeared inside the cabin, placed carefully near the fireplace. Not thrown, not carried, set down, like a message delivered without a sound. I found it while the storm thinned briefly, a shape half buried beneath snowdrifts near the mountain edge. At first, I thought it was debris. Then I saw the door, a cabin, but wrong, partially swallowed by snow and stone, like the mountain had tried to keep it hidden and failed halfway. Inside, candles burned, still lit, despite no one being there. Canned food lined shelves in careful rows. Unopened, unspoiled, the walls were covered in drawings. Dozens, all variations of the same thing. Wolf-like figures. Tall, pale, wrongly shaped. Every sketch slightly different, but all sharing the same feeling. Something that walked during wideouts. A tape recorder sat on a table, still running. It repeated warnings in a broken loop. Do not follow movement in snow. It uses visibility gaps. It is already inside distance. The tape stuttered, then restarted. I stepped deeper inside. The floor creaked under my weight, but not like old wood, like layered space. Too many places stacked under one structure. At the far end, I found a cellar door, half open, claw marks surrounded it, fresh enough to still feel intentional. From below, breathing, slow, controlled, rising upward through the darkness, like it had been waiting beneath the cabin longer than the cabin itself had existed. I closed the door without thinking, but the sound didn't stop. It just moved closer to listening again. The first whisper came just before the storm returned. My name, outside the cabin, soft, perfectly shaped. I froze immediately. The voice didn't repeat. It waited, as if checking whether I understood what had been said. Then it came again, from the left side of the cabin, then the right, then behind me, all at once, not overlapping, alternating, like something circling in different positions without moving physically. The windows began frosting over from the outside, slow patterns spreading inward, not ice forming naturally, more like deliberate covering, hiding. I backed away from the center of the room, but every corner felt occupied. Every shadow felt slightly heavier than before. Then I saw the mirror, covered partially by cloth. A gap had formed, just enough reflection to show the doorway behind me. For a fraction of a second, a silhouette appeared, tall, still, right behind where I stood. I turned instantly. Nothing there, but the reflection remained wrong for a moment longer than reality allowed. Then it vanished. The whispering stopped. The silence that followed was worse, because it wasn't empty anymore. It was attentive. I left before I understood I was leaving. Supplies were low. Or maybe I just stopped trusting the cabin to keep me safe. The forest outside looked familiar at first, but that feeling didn't last. The deeper I walked, the less the trees matched memory. Paths shifted subtly. Markers appeared where none existed before, and disappeared behind me without explanation. Snow fell in soft waves of fog, and between them, shapes, standing, still, only visible when the wind paused long enough to reveal them. I kept moving, because stopping felt worse than anything behind me. Then I noticed my footprints. They didn't make sense. Some led forward, some curved back toward places I hadn't been. Some disappeared entirely, as if the snow had rejected them. Night came early, or maybe it didn't come at all. Maybe I just stopped being able to measure it. The forest felt like it was guiding me now, not forcing, redirecting. Every direction I chose seemed slightly wrong, and slightly corrected, as if something wanted me somewhere specific. I didn't realize until later. I wasn't walking home. I was walking deeper into something that already knew the shape of my return, and the further I went, the more certain it became that I was not being lost. I was being led. The tent was never meant to feel like safety, only temporary cover, only something thin between a body and the rest of the world. That night, it became all I had. Snow had forced me off the trail earlier than expected. The forest lost its shape completely after dark, turning into shifting walls of fog and white silence. So I set the tent down wherever the ground felt flat enough to accept me. I remember the fabric snapping in the wind, cold biting through my gloves, the slow numbness spreading through my fingers as I tried to make the world small enough to survive it. Inside, everything felt closer than it should. My breath, the fabric walls, the dark pressing from every side. I sat there, not lying down, not sleeping, just listening to the storm move without direction. At first, there was only wind, then a sound beneath it. Not wind anymore, something heavier, a slow crunch in snow just outside the tent. I stopped moving immediately. The sound paused too. That was the first time I understood it wasn't random weather. It was reacting. I held my breath without deciding to. Seconds stretched too long. Nothing happened. Then the breathing started. Not loud, not sharp, just close enough to exist on the other side of fabric. Slow inhales, long, patient exhales. Circling, not circling fast, not pacing wildly. Moving around a tent in a measured loop like something was mapping where I ended and where it began. Snow shifted under it with each step. Soft compression. Careful weight. I stayed completely still. Even my thoughts felt too loud. The breathing stopped in one spot, right beside my shoulder. The fabric wall didn't move, but I could feel pressure through it. Not touching, just present, like something had pressed its attention against the tent and was waiting to see if I would respond. I didn't. Then came the sound again. Not footsteps, a change in breath. It mimicked something, a distant broken cry, like a person calling out far away in the forest, lost and weakening. The sound wasn't perfect. It didn't need to be. It only needed to feel familiar. It drifted slowly around the tent again, testing, waiting, listening for reaction. My throat tightened because it wasn't just noise. It was learning. Outside, the wind shifted direction suddenly. Snow hit the tent harder for a moment, then softened again, as if even the storm didn't want to interfere with what was happening here. The breathing came closer, not moving physically, just closer in perception, like distance itself had collapsed slightly. The fabric beside my face tightened inward for a moment, not tearing, not breaking, just acknowledging pressure. I stopped blinking, stopped swallowing, stopped existing in any way that might signal awareness. The breathing paused again, this time longer. The silence that followed felt wrong. Not safe, not empty, calculated. Then a shadow formed against the tent wall, not fully visible, just darker than the darkness behind it, tall enough that the upper edge of it never fully aligned with the tent's shape. It leaned closer, slowly, without urgency. The fabric pressed inward slightly, then released, like something inhaling the structure of my shelter. Then the sound came again, the crying, soft, human enough to confuse instinct, but wrong in rhythm, too controlled between sobs, too consistent in spacing, a pattern pretending to be emotion. I pressed my hand into the ground to stop it from shaking. The cold dirt under the tent felt suddenly thin, like there was less earth than expected. The breathing circled once more, slower now, not searching, confirming. Then it stopped directly in front of me. I didn't turn, didn't move. The tent felt suspended in a moment that had no intention of ending. A long silence followed. No wind, no snow impact, just stillness that felt held in place. Then a single exhale, so close it felt like it passed through the fabric and into the space behind my ribs. And after that, nothing, not leaving, not retreating, just absence that refused confirmed departure. I stayed awake until the light changed, not because morning came quickly, but because exhaustion eventually stopped caring whether it did or not. When I finally unzipped the tent slowly, the world outside was unchanged. Snow, trees, fog, no visible sign of anything nearby. But the ground around the tent told a different story. Compressed snow in a full circle. Not random wandering, not animal movement. A complete perimeter. And one section, directly in front of the entrance, slightly deeper than the rest. As if something had stood there the longest, waiting for me to either leave or finally understand I was never alone inside it. The snowfall changed again after the tent. Not heavier, not lighter, just different, like the forest had stopped trying to be seen clearly. Fog arrived with it, thick enough to swallow trees whole, thick enough to erase distance entirely. I couldn't tell where the ground ended and the air began. Everything became layered white silence. Then I saw the figures. At first, they were mistakes in visibility, shifts in fog density, shapes that almost resolved into meaning, then didn't. But they kept returning. Between trees, behind drifting snow, just beyond the edge of focus. Pale eyes, not glowing, not reflecting, just present inside the fog itself, watching without movement. Every time I looked directly at them, they vanished. Every time I looked away, they returned closer. I stopped walking after a while, not because I wanted to, because the forest stopped making sense of direction. The trees stood like broken markers in endless white. No trail, no sound of anything alive, only fog pressing in slow layers. That's when I found the posters, nailed to frozen trunks, old paper hardened by cold, missing persons notices, faces staring outward from weather-warped ink, some torn, some faded, some still readable. Each one showed someone who had vanished during winter storms, people who, according to the paper, never came back. I stood in front of one longer than I should have. The face looked familiar in a way I couldn't place. Then I moved to the next tree, and the next, and the next. Every poster showed the same pattern. Disappearance, storm, no return. Then I saw it, a final poster, newer than the rest. The paper still holding faint softness beneath frost. My face, not drawn, not sketched, a photograph. Taken from a distance I don't remember standing at. My name printed beneath it. Missing. I didn't breathe for a moment. The fog around me thickened slightly. As if reacting, the pale eyes returned between the trees. Closer now, not moving fast. Just existing in reduced distance. Watching the moment I understood. The forest wasn't tracking me. It had already documented me. And the posters weren't warnings. They were records. A history of people who reached this exact realization too late. The wind shifted, or something that only pretended to be wind. The fog parted briefly, and for a fraction of a second, I saw multiple figures standing beyond the trees. Still, perfectly still, their white eyes aligned at different heights in the fog, like something that didn't belong to one body anymore. Then everything closed again, fog sealing itself back into place. The posters remained on the trees, my face still staring out from frozen paper. Behind me, snow shifted softly, not loud enough to identify, just close enough to confirm what I already knew. I wasn't being watched for the first time. I was being recognized. The cabin felt quieter that day. Not peaceful, not safe, just paused. Even the wind outside moved differently, like it was waiting for permission to continue. I hadn't touched the radio in days. It turned on by itself anyway. A sudden crack of static broke through the silence, sharp enough to make the air feel thinner. I froze. The sound didn't fade. It stabilized. Not random noise anymore. A signal. Then a voice pushed through it. Broken. Strained. Barely holding shape. "This is Ranger Station 9. The words cut in and out, swallowed by bursts of static. I leaned closer without meaning to. The voice continued. "Entire camp's gone overnight. No tracks, no signs of struggle. Just empty snow." A pause, long enough to feel intentional. Then, a distant scream threaded through the signal. Not loud, not close, but real enough to tighten the silence in the room. The radio hissed again. The voice returned, lower now, more unstable. "If anyone is receiving this, do not follow the wideouts. They are not weather. My hand hovered near the dial, but I didn't turn it. Something about the message felt like it would punish interruption. The signal began breaking apart. Fragments of coordinates slipped through between static bursts, not spoken cleanly, more like forced-through damage. Numbers repeating, reassembling themselves in my mind even when I didn't want them to. Then the voice changed. For a moment, not the ranger anymore. Something else layered underneath it. Deeper, calmer. Wrong. You are close. The words landed too clearly, too directly. I stepped back. The radio continued anyway. Now only static, but not empty static. Structured, like breathing hidden inside noise. The coordinates repeated again, faintly, insisting. Outside, the forest felt closer than before. Not physically, perceptually, like distance had been reduced without movement. I found myself standing near the door, without remembering walking there. The snow outside looked thicker than it should have. Heavy, silent, waiting. I followed the coordinates later, without deciding fully to. The forest didn't resist. It adjusted. Each step felt prearranged, like I was walking inside a path already shaped by something else. The terrain changed gradually. Trees thinning, snow deepening, silence tightening. Then I saw it. An abandoned observation station, half buried in snow. Metal structure leaning slightly underway to winter. No footprints leading to it. No signs anyone had ever arrived. But the radio inside was still transmitting. I stepped in slowly. The air was colder than outside. Inside the station, the radio sat on a desk, active. No visible power source. No movement. Just signal. Static filled the room the moment I entered. Then the same voice returned, but not through speakers anymore. It felt like it was inside the structure itself. You found it? I turned sharply. No one there. Only empty metal walls and frozen instruments covered in dust that shouldn't have stayed undisturbed this long. The radio crackled again. Coordinates stopped, replaced by silence. Then a final message cut through. Soft, direct, unchanging. It never left the area. The words held longer than the signal should have allowed. Then everything stopped. No static, no hum, just dead quiet. I looked at the radio. It was still on, still working, still waiting. Outside, the wind began again, but differently now, like it had already learned everything it needed from the message, and no longer needed to pretend it was weather. After the last broadcast, the forest stopped feeling like a place. It felt like a perimeter, something drawn around me rather than around the land. The nights became clearer in their silence. No wind, no distant calls, no shifting branches, only stillness pressing against the glass like weight without form. That night, I didn't sleep, not because I couldn't, because I stopped trusting what sleep would let in. The lantern inside the cabin burned low, its light trembling across the walls in uneven waves. Shadows moved softly, not from motion outside, but from a flame itself struggling to stay consistent. Then the storm arrived, not gradual, immediate. Snow slammed into the windows like thrown ash, thick and heavy, erasing the forest in seconds. And in that white chaos, something stood. At first, it was only shape. Tall, upright, too still to be weather. Outside the bedroom window, I didn't move. Not even my breath changed at first. The creature remained motionless, half hidden in shifting snow. Its outline bent slightly with the storm, but its stance did not. As lightning split the sky behind it, I saw more of it, what for clinging to its body. Long limbs held too naturally for something that size. A posture that didn't belong to any animal I had ever known. And its eyes, pale, reflective, not glowing, watching, not searching, not hunting, observing. The lantern light inside the cabin flickered across the glass between us. For a moment, our reflections overlapped. Mine inside, its outside. Then it lifted one hand, slowly, deliberately, pressing it against the glass. The window did not crack. It did not fog. It simply accepted the contact. The hand was long, too structured, almost careful in how it held itself there. No aggression followed. No sudden movement. only presence. It stayed like that through the storm, unmoving, as if time had become irrelevant once recognition had been established. I didn't step back, not because I wasn't afraid, because something in the stillness made movement feel unnecessary. The creature tilted its head slightly, not like curiosity, more like confirmation. Outside, snow continued collapsing against the cabin walls, but none of it seemed to matter anymore. There was no chase, no attempt, only watching. Hours passed in that frozen arrangement of glass and breath and pale light. At some point, the storm weakened, the wind softened, the snow slowed, and the creature remained, until the first hint of sunrise broke through the white horizon, slow, distant, as if the world had forgotten how to begin again. The light touched his outline, and for the first time it shifted, not away, not toward, just slightly, as if acknowledging the end of the moment rather than its interruption. Then it lowered its hand, still watching, still present, but no longer pressing against the boundary between us. It didn't leave when daylight fully arrived. It simply stood farther back in the fog, where detail dissolved into suggestion again. And even then, I could still feel it, not as threat, not as movement, but as understanding that it decided not to end. The storms ended without warning. No final gust, no fading wind, no last echo through the trees, just silence. It arrived like something had been switched off deep inside the forest. For the first time in weeks, I could hear nothing pressing against the cabin walls. No movement outside, no distant howls, no static in the air, only stillness, so complete it felt unnatural. I stood by the window for a long time, waiting for the silence to break itself. It didn't. The snow outside looked untouched in a different way now. Not active, not shifting, frozen in place like a pause moment. Even the fog had withdrawn, leaving the forest exposed under pale, washed-out light. I began preparing to leave, slowly, carefully, like any sudden movement might restart something that had finally stopped paying attention. I packed what I could carry. Food, light gear, a map I no longer fully trusted. Every sound inside the cabin felt louder, now that the world outside had stopped answering back. The floor creaked under my steps like it was remembering how noise worked. I paused at the door before opening it, held still, listened, nothing. Then I stepped outside. The cold air felt clean in a way I didn't recognize anymore. Not safe, just empty. The path ahead stretched through quiet trees. No movement between them. No shifting shadows. No distant presence watching from fog. For the first time, the forest felt like a place instead of an audience. I walked for a long time. The silence followed, but without pressure now. Just absence. Eventually, I found something on the ground. Footprints. Fresh. Leading away from the cabin. I stopped. They were clear in the snow. Defined. Recent. Not mine. They moved in a steady line deeper into the forest, disappearing between trees that no longer seemed to hide anything. I followed them without deciding fully to. The forest didn't react. No shift in air. No change in pressure. Just path. The deeper I went, the more the silence felt structured, like it had purpose now. After a long stretch of walking, the track split the snow near a clearing. Only one set continued forward. The other ended. No disturbance. No return marks. Just absence where something had once been. I stood there longer than I meant to. The wind did not come back. The trees did not move. And somewhere deep in that quiet, I understood something I couldn't name clearly. The forest wasn't empty. It had simply finished what it was doing. I followed the remaining footprints until they faded completely into untouched snow. There was no final sound. No warning. Only the feeling of distance closing in a different direction. When I finally turned back, the cabin was no longer visible. Not hidden. Not far. Just no longer there in the way I remembered it. The forest stretched evenly in every direction, as if it had never contained anything else. I stood alone in the silence for a long time. Then very faintly, not behind me, not in front, just everywhere at once. Breathing returned. Not loud, not close, just certain. And in that quiet return of presence without shape, the silence finally felt complete.